You are now listening to Hinckley Community Radio, a non-profit podcast radio station.
The Bennington Triangle is a phrase coined by author Joseph A. Citro during a radio broadcast in 1992, naming an area of southwestern Vermont where several people went missing over a 5-year period between 1945 and 1950. In one of his books, Shadow Child, he devotes further discussion to these disappearances. Precisely what area is encompassed in this hypothetical mystery triangle is not clear, but the area centres on Glastenbury Mountain and includes most of the towns surrounding it, including Bennington, Woodford, Shaftesbury and Somerset. Glastonbury and its immediate neighbouring township, Somerset, were both once thriving industrial towns, but they began a slow decline towards the 19th century and have now become essentially ghost towns. Greetings, Unexplained peeps. Thank you for tuning in and listening to Mark's Unexplained World. My name is Mark Hughes. I'm a psychic medium, an eclectic Wicca, and a Nocturian starseed who wonders if the universe will ever take its pants down, wiggle its bits around and say, "Hey, look everyone, I really am in 3D. Tonight I'm going to tell you the mysterious story of the Bennington Triangle. And the necessary disclaimer: this story is a case that sadly involves children and may prove upsetting for some. You listen at your own discretion. Also, all opinions and comments are strictly my own, but the facts remain 100% true. I also apologise in advance if I pronounce anything incorrectly. My English, although it is my first and only language, does need some elocution training at times. But hey, I am an alien, remember? In fact, we all are. So, on with the story. The Bennington Triangle has a long history that predates the colonisation of North America, and it still persists to this very day. It has inspired books and movies over the years, as well as giving rise to many supernatural reports of Bigfoot, UFOs, and interdimensional portals. The truth of the Bennington Triangle remains unknown, but the area has now mysteriously swallowed as many as 40 intrepid hikers and residents. The Triangle's most enduring unsolved mysteries are the disappearances that plagued the area from 1945 to 1950. In that 5-year span, several people went missing on or near the Glastenbury Mountain. I've picked out a handful of the most talked about cases that I think might be of interest to you, the listener. Hopefully you'll be engrossed. The first case to tell you about is of a man named Middy Rivers. That took place in 1945. This 75-year-old man disappeared on the 12th of November 1945. He often served as a mountain guide due to his extensive knowledge of the area. He was leading such a group back to their camp when, for whatever reason, he sped up and got ahead of the group just enough to be out of sight. In the seconds it took the group to catch up with him, he had completely vanished. It's unlikely that he became lost because he was so highly experienced at navigating the mountain. Nevertheless, he was never seen again. An extensive search for him was conducted at the time, but the only evidence discovered was a single rifle cartridge that was found in a nearby stream. The speculation was that Middy Rivers had leaned over the edge of a scoop of water and the cartridge had dropped out of his pocket into the stream. The disappearance occurred in the Long Trail Road area and Vermont Route 9. As said previously, Middy Rivers was an experienced hunter and fisherman and was more than familiar with the local area. Will we ever find out what happened that day? Next up, my case number 2 is about a young lady named Paula Weldon that took place just the following year in 1946. Paula Jean Weldon, aged at only 18, disappeared about a year later than the first case. On the 1st of December 1946, Weldon was a sophomore at Bennington College. She had decided to set out on a hike on the Long Trail. Many saw her go, including Ernest Whitman, a Bennington Banner employee, who gave her the directions. Paula Weldon was spotted on her way out by several people, including drivers who gave her rides and fellow hikers who warned her that she wasn't dressed warmly enough to hike up mountains. She was also alleged to have been seen on the trail by an elderly couple who were about 100 yards or 91 metres or so behind her. According to them, she turned a corner, and when they reached the same corner, she had disappeared, much like Midi Rivers. An extensive search was conducted when she didn't return to the campus following her hike, which included the posting of a $5,000 reward and help from the FBI. However, no evidence of her disappearance was ever found. Also, she was not wearing a jacket when she left, and considering that it was 50 degrees outside at the start and they later dropped down to 9 degrees that night, makes this even more of a mystery. Had Paula Weldon been wearing her usual bright red coat, it would have made her so much easier to spot. But the baffled searchers couldn't find any sign of either her or her brightly coloured clothes. Her case became one of the most famous disappearances in the area, mostly because it initiated Vermont to found its very own state police force. With no police of their own, Vermont only had one state investigator to put on the case. Police from both New York and Connecticut were eventually called in by Weldon's father to help with the case, but she was never found. There are unconfirmed rumours speculating that she had in fact moved to Canada with a boyfriend, or that she became a recluse living alone in the mountains. A little bit of trivia for you here. Weldon's disappearance was the inspiration for the 1951 novel Hangs a Man by Shirley Jackson. Next case. Case number 3. Another young lady called Betty Fraser, who disappeared in mid-1948, 18 months later than Paula. Betty Fraser, 26, was first reported missing on the 5th of May 1948 by her husband, Declan Fraser. Mr. Fraser had reportedly grown concerned about his wife's recent wild behaviour, and when she failed to make the journey back from her local bar on foot, he reported her as missing. Initially, the barman, Troy Rogers, was implicated in her disappearance after a patron claimed that he had given her a ride home after closing time. However, a later recreation of the route they would have driven disproved this theory, given Troy's alibi for the later part of the evening. The last known sighting of her was by her neighbour, who reported seeing her walking very unsteadily along Highway 30 in the general direction of Bennington, like she was in a trance, and that when they stopped to offer her assistance, she ignored their offers of a ride home. Her body was later discovered around 1 month later and 17 miles away from where she went missing, on a forest trail in West Dover. The case was then closed and determined as death by misadventure, although the distance travelled and the prominent location of where the body was found led some locals to label the case as suspicious. And our next, 4th case to discuss is that of James Tedford, who went missing in 1949. James E. Tedford, a veteran, was one of the next people to disappear. He went missing on the 1st of December 1949, exactly 3 years to the day that Paula Weldon had disappeared. Tedford was a resident of the Bennington Soldiers' Home. He had been in St Albans visiting relatives who accompanied him to the local bus stop, which was the last time he was seen. According to witnesses, Tedford got on the bus and he was still on the bus at the last stop before arriving at Bennington. Somewhere, and this is where it gets really weird, folks, between the last stop and the stop at Bennington, Tedford vanished. That's right, vanished. His belongings were found still in the luggage rack, and an open bus timetable was found left on his vacant seat. It could be argued that Tedford got off at another stop on the way to his destination, but if he did, why would he leave his luggage and bus timetable behind? Again, weird. On another note, and I doubt that there is any Bennington Triangle connection, but I think it's worth me telling you another part of James Tedford's life, just because I can. James had what appeared to be a fairly quiet and contented life. I'll try that again, shall I? Take another run at that one. James had what appeared to be a fairly quiet and contented life with his much younger wife, 28-year-old Pearl Tedford. To most, they would have seemed to be a normal, unassuming couple. Yet nevertheless, things became very strange when World War II loomed along the horizon and Tedford went off for his second tour of duty. When he left home, things between him and Pearl had, by all accounts, been good, with no known problems between the two of them. It was fair then to assume that he would have no reason to think otherwise, that on his return home he wouldn't be able to pick up his happy life where he left it when he went away. When Tedford did return from his tour of duty, his wife seemed normal to him at first, but shortly after coming back home, he returned one day to find the house completely empty and Pearl nowhere to be seen, even though she was supposed to be there. The house was completely all in order, and there was even a meal laid out that Pearl had been preparing for them. So James just assumed she had stepped out for a moment or two and thought nothing more of it. By now, late evening had arrived and Pearl had still not returned home, which was very out of character for her, and Tedford now began to worry. Speaking to the neighbours and locals, he found that she had been seen that day on her way into town and that she had seemed completely normal, in good spirits, and not exhibiting any sign of distress or signs of any problems. When she still had not returned by the following day, the police were notified, but despite their searches, they could find no trace of her. The police eventually concluded that she had run off, but then why had she been seen in completely normal spirits earlier that day? Why hadn't she left a note behind? And why did she leave a half-prepared meal? No one had a clue, and Pearl Tedford was never seen again, leaving James Tedford on his own prior to his own disappearance. The next person, my case number 5, is that of Paul Jepson, who went missing in 1950, just 10 months later. On the 12th of October in 1950, little 8-year-old Paul Jepson from Shaftesbury had been accompanying his mother and wandered away from a wooded area where his father had parked his truck. She left her son unattended while she fed some pigs. His mother was gone for about an hour, and when she returned, the boy had vanished without a trace. Hundreds of locals gathered together to form a search party, and a New Hampshire sheriff even brought in a bloodhound dog to help sniff out the missing child. Paul Jepson was last seen wearing a bright red jacket that should have made him more visible than most. At first, the dog was able to pick up his scent, but suddenly lost the scent trail at a nearby crossroads. Could this have meant that the boy was abducted by someone in a car? As the case dragged on without any sign of Paul, the boy's father told the Albany Times-Union that it could possibly have been the lure of the mountains that pulled his son in. Apparently the boy had talked of nothing else for days before the fateful trip where he disappeared. One more case to ponder.